Yeah, where is it?
It's over here. Follow me.
Okay, hi everybody. It's Tuesday, December 1st, 2020. And this week we're gonna pick up where we left off. And I want to recapitulate some very important points from Dr. Valerie Hunt's research. And I want to really honor her spirit, her her life's work. She put her life's work in a few people's hands. And in the past week, I've been in touch with her niece who runs her website. And it's amazing when, we live in a world right now that's very chaotic. You can fly by very profound things and really miss it. Can everybody hear? It says from Amy to everyone, no audio on our end.
I can hear fine.
I can hear.
Okay.
I can
Check
hear.
your audio, Amy.
All good.
Okay, so other people are hearing Amy, so you got to see what's going on. And if you have a persistent problem, you can always get the replay. So You know, I really want to honor Valerie's spirit. She spent a lot of time with me on, before, long before she died, actually. And, last week we were talking about her research into the human auric energy fields and her ability to record the human aura in probably the most advanced way I've ever seen, beyond ordinary Kirlian photography. And I actually did Kirlian photography, when I was in my school days, and I was studying, photography and printing, photography, developing film, and she then develops the ability to read the frequencies coming off of a person's body and nervous system, and she discovers that most human beings, if we divide the organism into three categories, the lower house, the mid house, and the upper house, she found that most people were just in this cozy middle zone, and that their lower house was cut off and they couldn't go super high. And then she found also that people that could go super high but had cut off their lower house were very prone to cancer. Now, it doesn't mean they will get cancer, but they're very disembodied. And you'll see this in aura photography. If a person has too much blue and purple, if again, when you get your aura picture taken, your aura is changing constantly. And one of the beauties of her system of being able to see a person live, as we saw last week, is you can see as soon as this woman with her child starts chanting a tone, suddenly her aura brightens, and we saw the spiraling wave connecting her up into cosmos. But one of the most incredible things about her research is she found that if you can raise a person's frequency up and get them up near 250,000 hertz, and she didn't do studies beyond that because of it all has to do with capacity. The capacity of scientific detection systems to detect phenomena is the limitation of science. And this is where science has a problem with consciousness. It's funny, I just saw this week this amazing, it's a TED style talk between a Buddhist scholar, Alan Watts, and this, very famous quantum physicist. And this physicist is telling you in the end of this whole lecture how we know everything that life is. We know what that is, and we know that all of that ends at the moment of death. So there's no life after death. And I'm laughing to myself saying, what is the one thing that has always been with you since you were a child, that has survived all the vicissitudes, which is the changeabilities of your life, all of the phenomenon, is the pure witness. And if you look inside yourself and you see who or what is this awareness that's having all these experiences, that pure witness never dies. It survived everything you've ever gone through. It remains. And yet there's this physicist telling you, well, yes, the witness, what it's witnessing, which is phenomena in the body, will no longer be part of your experience, but something else will. Because the very fact that consciousness decided to participate in this body, to come together with it, means that it's observing and experiencing. Experiencing and observing are the same thing. But if you could withdraw out of your sensory self, vibration self, into pure witness, what would you experience? And that is one of the most profound techniques in meditation, which is called self-inquiry, where you're inquiring. You ask the question, who am I? Who is the pure I-ness that's in me, that's watching all this? And when you get into that place where you're just this pure experiencer, you are you are in a state that is the origin of exactly in the purest sense of who you are. Because everything you're experiencing is changing, right? You have a sensation and then that sensation passes. If I pick up my cup of yerba mate, my brain tells me, that's my yerba mate. And then all of a sudden it's gone. So, but one thing that remains is the pure witness. And in fact, this is in the Gospel of Thomas, which of course was hidden by the church, where Jesus is telling Thomas, he who finds the beginning will know the end and conquer over everything. And basically, the beginning and the end are the same, because in the beginning of your life, there's you, the purest you. And what's amazing about the purest you is it has a certain quality to it that's different than somebody else. And it's purest you. You can go back to your early childhood and you can come to yourself in your current age now, and you'll see that character, that special person, that uniqueness of you is married into the witness, which is the pure infinite spatial consciousness that surrounds and watches your experience. But so when we go back to Valerie Hunt and we see her telling us that most people don't have this incredible bandwidth in their system, they're really locked into this one area, which is somewhere in the middle. And I want to play this. It's really kind of fun to see this, but I'll just go to share screen for a second and come to my radio stack. This is, in the early days, of course, a lot of us remember this. When you were listening to radio, you would remember that. It's kind of funny. So you were tuning your radio either in the FM bands or the AM bands, and AM means amplitude modulation, and FM means frequency modulation. And modulation are techniques in radio where we tag on our information, right? So we say a voice is information, and actually pictures are information. So we can frequency modulate or amplitude modulate information onto a frequency. And a frequency is a radio wave, or a TV, microwave is the same thing, but they just operate at different frequency bands. So when you're tuning and you would hear that static, all that static is actually the cosmos. It's actually picking up on the vibrations in the universe around you. And in most of the tuning we do on our radios, it appears that nothing's going on in the universe. Well, guess what is one of the most profound things about the frequencies that are coming off of you is you are your own pulse modulator. So therefore, everything you're feeling, everything you're thinking, you are sending out you. And it's amazing to really realize it, that, the way humans have evolved over actually millions of years, and we've come to this very narrow focus point where we have the ability to, like, I remember getting my first transistor radio, in the 1960s. My dad took us to the horse races in Berkeley, California. It was really fun as, 4 boys to go to the horse races and get a ticket and bet on a horse, win some money. I remember winning $4 or $5 on this horse, which was a lot of money back then, right? And I bought my first transistor radio. And then I also remember building my first radio, which is when you just take a tube, I used a toilet paper roll, and you wrap the copper wire around the tube. And it was Nikola Tesla who discovered this, that as soon as you coil, wire, you give birth to radio waves. And in those days, all you had to do is have your coil and a little crystal diode and an earbud, headphones, and you stick the earbud in your ear, and you had a tuning rod, and you slid the tuning rod up and down the tube, and you could hear radio stations. And that was really cool. But mostly what you heard was this static. And the static is actually the cosmos. It's part of literally the cosmic microwave background radiation and all of the frequencies of the universe. So when we were listening to our radios in those days, we were all getting frequencies. We were getting unknown frequencies, especially in those empty spaces between the radio stations. And in that same sense, every one of us, based on the exact height of our spine, we are all operating at very precise frequencies, because based on your height, we can calculate the most perfect frequency that you attenuate at, which means that you fully attune to. So people of different heights on the planet are sending and receiving at very similar, like if you're exactly the same height as somebody else, you're going to be pretty close to their wavelength. Although if you get down to millimeters and micrometers, which, then essentially you're going to find that every human being is a different height on a very, very precise level. But the point is, you, through all of your living photons, what Fritz Albert Popp, the German biophysicist, discovered is every human being is sending out light that comes from the little coil DNA in the nucleus in the center of every one of your cells. And that your DNA is sending and receiving you. It's sending and receiving you. So this is how the universe works, is when you understand you live in a solar system, and the sun is our primary source of electromagnetic energy and light. Our sun is not only sending and activating our physical aspect, light body, but it's receiving everything. So if you wonder where, and this is where we get into a deeper level of noosphere, the idea that the earth is this conscious living organism. And this conscious organism is like a brain, right? Like, one of the things, and this is in Dr. Bruce Lipton's work, is that cellular biologists thought the brain of the cell was in the DNA, was in the actual DNA. But later they found the brain of the cell was actually in the membrane. It was actually in the membrane. And the membrane would be the equivalent to the skin and the nerves in the skin on your body. And so this is where, on the periphery, most of our emotional intelligence is held. The brain is a central computer processor, but it's not the center of your experience, right? So if we looked at the amplitude of all of the light coming off a person, most of it is coming off the chest or the heart, because that's where there is the most heat, is in the heart and the heart center. But actually all the organs, which correspond to the chakras, are producing heat, and heat is light. It's infrared light. So when you realize that you as a person are transmitting 24/7 you, then you just have to look at yourself and say, what am I putting out? And what you're putting out is what you're going to get. Are you 100% authentic? Are you 100% coming from integrity as a person? Are you 100% honest with the universe, with what you need to experience right now? And if you ask yourself what do I need to experience right now? And you're 100% honest with it, and you put it out, the universe hears it. And your universe is local. It's your Earth, your 9 planets, the sun. The sun receives your signal actually faster than light. It's probably the physical. I'm not going to call it God. See, the Egyptians would call the sun God Ra, right? And they saw that as the brightest being that was obvious in the local solar system that we live in. So all of it acts as brains. And these brains are interconnected and intersharing information with one another. So you have your own brains, the membranes of your cells, which is what Dr. Bruce Lipton discovered in cooperative research, is the true intelligence of the cell. And then all of your collective cells, your skin is your personal membrane. And therefore you're sharing through your biophotonic pulsed modulated, just like a radio station, information with your community, with your world. And we evolved as a civilization to the point that we invented radio technology to the point that we don't need to tune on those old radios anymore by hand. We still have radio stations, which is still a wonderful thing, although they'll eventually become obsolete. But with the internet, we can now communicate with anybody in the world if we know how to find them. And then we can decide who we want to see as in our community, right? Which is what we're doing right now. And this is part of the human desire to share and to communicate. But even more sophisticated than this technology, far more sophisticated than this technology. And the time right now is 618, which is the golden ratio, 1.618, right? That's exactly the time at that moment that I just happened to look at the time, which is beyond a coincidence. At this moment, you are billions of times more sophisticated than this internet technology, billions of times. If you really understand how this system works. So this system basically, and this comes from my 45 years of daily meditation practice experiences and in cooperation with Dr. Valerie Hunt's work, is that you need to raise the frequency of this so that the leap into the superconscious realms is easier. So if this thing is vibrating at a very low frequency, which is what Dr. Valerie Hunt's data showed, that most humans were operating nowhere near their optimal frequency range, nowhere near it. And that's because in our religious and spiritual access to ancient knowledge, we lost the art of frequency. Frequency is an art, and it's actually food. I mean, this is in the Bible where I forget whether it was Jesus who said this, but we cannot live on bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. And the word word comes from the Greek word logos, and logos means perfect harmonic vibration based on a perfect harmonic ratio. So therefore, what our real food is frequency and ratio. So therefore, that art of frequency and ratio has been lost. We lost it because we told ourselves that you just had to have a belief system. And if you followed this belief system, don't worry, we're your representatives of your religion. We'll take care of the rest for you. And that creates a codependency between you and that organization. And if that organization becomes corrupt, well, then you're subject to being a victim of that corruption. But when you understand the source yourself and you have access to the tools yourself to do frequency training, and you train this system of yours to raise its vibration. And when Valerie Hunt said this, I looked inside myself when she said, she's got to get a person to come up to this higher frequency capacity, but you don't want to turn off any part of this system, which means you don't want to repress the root system, which is sensuality, sexuality, and then you come into survival. You don't want to repress survival. And then you come into your heart. And this is the area, believe it or not, we're more repressed with giving and receiving love as a civilization than anything in our system. We may say, yes, we are a sexually repressed civilization, and we are. You can see it, because when a civilization becomes sexually repressed, it becomes perverted. And perversions come from not being integral, not coming from integrity of what exactly it is that you want to experience. And when we're not 100% honest with ourselves and with what we want to experience, which is how Adam and Eve were created in the Garden of Eden as a metaphor. You could call Adam and Eve as a metaphor. Whether you believe it physically happened or not doesn't matter. I believe it was a regenesis, that after millions of years of human evolution, there was a supremely God realized being that came with supreme intelligence and reconfigured the human genome, the human genetics, and recalibrated a new man and woman for the earth. And that explains this quantum leap in evolution that archaeologists cannot explain, which is the sudden arrival of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. It appeared so suddenly in the background that there's no way to explain it in the theory of evolution, that we were evolving from an ape-like species, and how did we suddenly have these things? And the only thing that can explain the suddenness of it would be a recalibrated human being. And that recalibrated human being was pure and innocent and actually so full of love and non-judgment. And we've talked about this in earlier episodes in the Garden of Eden. So what this system is a system that when it goes into self-judgment, good and evil, which is neurosis, it starts to feel shameful about itself and its needs, and therefore it becomes covert. It loses integrity because it's not 100% honest and with what it needs, which is what we really need more than anything is love. We need to be held and touched and caressed in love. But when we buy into guilt and shame and fear is even worse than guilt and shame, then we become control able. We allow ourselves to lose our ability to be in charge of our own system. So we become control able because this organization comes along that claims to be the representative of God, and this organization claims to have authority over us in our shame and our guilt, and it offers us a system of a way out. But if you go back to the purity of the innocence of the original, you'll see that there is no shame, there is no guilt. But then the perversions and the lack of integrity, and even the desire to become excessively wealthy is a perversion. Because for any person to become excessively wealthy, they have to draw upon others and steal their labor and their wealth. And so the reason I'm talking about this is because if you look inside yourself and you realize you are a 24/7 transmitter and that you are transmitting you, anything you're doing or transmitting that is not coming from purity and integrity is read by the local system. The sun knows everything you're doing, absolutely everything, because you are quantum entangled with the stardust that everything you're made out of. All of the elements on the periodic table that you're made out of was made in stars. And in the moment of the creation of the elements, they became quantum entangled. And what quantum entanglement tells us is the moment you separate over any distance, any particles that are quantum entangled, they have a faster than the speed of light communication mechanism. Faster than the speed of light communication mechanism. So if we're made of stardust, which we are, then all of the stars in the cosmos that participated in our chemistry are faster than light, sending, receiving to us. And that's really amazing just to have that realization, because not all the elements on the periodic table were made in our sun. Believe it or not, many of them were made in other stars and other stars and other stars. So there's lots of pieces to us, to this dust that we're cooperatively, living inside of, that are bonded to multiple star systems. And that means we're in instantaneous communication with it. So that's why it's so important to do this tuning work. And the other thing is, if you're 100% honest with yourself, and you go through your processes of what you feel you need to experience in your life, and that means from the base level, the sensual, to what you need for sustaining your life, which could be home and architecture, could be food and just economy. And when you're 100% honest, are you feeling filled to the point that your cup is overflowing with pure love and pure bliss? And if you're 100% honest, you'll find, and as any wise person has found, that any temporary gratification without love is not long-term fulfilling. Like, so when a person it becomes attracted to, you can say, perverted sexuality, you could say that those people just have short little spurts of what they think is blissful, and then it's over. And then in the interim periods between those, there's total boredom. And if you really start resonating in your heart field, and you find that this heart, if it's connected to your sensuality, and it becomes love making, and that is something completely different. That is actually fulfilling. And as you meditate deeper and deeper and deeper, and as you get older, you'll even go beyond that desire, because you're 100% honest with yourself, right? You can say, and I can say this as, a person living in their 60th year, that of all my experiences I've had, and I'm 100% honest with myself, what gives me the greatest fulfillment? And I can tell you that when I meditate and I go into the God state, it's more fulfilling than anything. It's more fulfilling than all of the sensual desires, but those are still part of the experience of being human. They're not gone. But yet this desire, as you get more into this God awareness, the ability to experience this God field, you have to be terribly honest with yourself and say, this is way more fulfilling. Why? Because one, when I go into this state, it's eternal, and it supplies me with more bliss, more consciousness than anything that is in the lower part of the house that I'm experiencing. So again, let's go back to what Valerie Hunt's data suggested. She suggests that most people are trapped in this middle zone right here, and they don't have much fulfillment or energy coming in their root experience. And The root chakra, the sensual chakra, is not just sex, it's food. It's the sensation of water, of swimming, of being heated up, being cozy and warm, being just cozy and warm, right? And when you, I remember this because when I was a tree planter, I had to really train myself not to be ruled by my senses. I remember it would be pouring rain outside and it was cold, and you get your rain gear on and you jump out of that really warm giant Ford truck, and you're going to be dropped off on the side of a mountain. And I was a very rare tree planter. I worked alone. So they would, because I was confident being alone with the bears and, you know, the cougars and all that. And when I got dropped out of the truck, you leave that comfort zone, that cozy, warm space, right? And if you don't challenge yourself to get out of that cozy little middle space, you're not going to get super high, and you're not going to be able to integrate the bottom to the middle to the top. And as a civilization, I can see this, that the desire for wealth is so that we can just stay in this cozy little space where we don't have to do anything with our energy field. We can just stay there. Maybe we inherited a ton of money when we were young. Some you know, people are born into super wealthy families, but there's a price to pay for that. The price to pay for that is you don't have to do anything. You can just fly off and do whatever the heck you want. But if you were 100% honest, 100% honest, and this is what happened to the Buddha. The Buddha was born as a prince in the most incredibly wealthy family. And as a young prince, he could have any girl he wanted. And it's really funny because in this book, The Lost Gospel, which is a very, very scholastic look at the missing evidence that Jesus was actually married. He became married. It's very similar to the story of the Buddha. He was a prince. He was not born into a poor lineage. Remember, if you're of the lineage of the prophets of God, if you're the lineage of Solomon, from Abraham to Solomon, there's enormous wealth there. There's so much wealth there. In fact, Mary Magdalene's family was enormously wealthy. They owned all the fishing vessels in the Sea of Galilee, and they were very, very wealthy. And there's no way this woman was ever a prostitute. This whole story was completely fabricated by great powers that deceive the masses. But both the Buddha and Christ in this book were the same. They were young men. They were like princes, and they could have any of the most beautiful girls in the kingdom they wanted. And in Jesus's story, he sees this, and it's debatable whether he participated as a young man in exploring different young women, but he eventually adheres himself and bonds himself to Mary Magdalene as the absolute most supremely enlightened woman, who's extremely, extremely spiritually evolved. In the case of the Buddha marries Yasodhara and has a son, Rahula, and then he leaves his family. He leaves his family to search for enlightenment in the wilderness. And what does that tell you? What that tells you is, with all the wealth in the world, anything, he can have anything he wants, and he's experienced those things, he has not fulfilled. He's feeling there's something missing on the inside. And you'll see this with super, super wealthy people and Hollywood celebrities. They can't hold their marriages. They don't know what they want. They have so much money, they can try anything. And they do so many different bizarre things, and they still are not fulfilled. They're not filled. They don't know how to go on this path, of frequency and come to this place where you start to attain resonance. You start to once you've done enough frequency work, enough meditation work, you start to vibrate with the cosmos, and your energy field starts to merge with these higher and higher level integrity fields. There's nothing that can compare to it. Even though there's nothing that compare to it, you still are human. You still have this background where you still eat food and you still have these desires for sensation, but they don't rule you anymore. They don't rule you anymore. So the Buddha comes back after he attains full enlightenment. He's gone through all 7 levels of the energy field, the same 7 levels that are described by Saint Teresa of Avila, and the 7 levels of the interior castle, which is the interior castle is the 7 levels of self-illumination inside of God. And you see the story of Muhammad going through the 7 levels of heaven. And if you read in the Gnostic Gospels, there's a gospel called the Treatise on the 8th and the 9th, which is all the apostles are sitting around Christ. And they're all in the 7th level. And it's unimaginable what that means to be in the 7th level. And they're asking him how to attain the 8th and the 9th, which are also recorded in Buddhism as the most advanced, extremely, extremely rare human beings eventually can reach the 8th and the 9th. And we don't have anybody on the planet like that anymore. There's nobody at those levels of realization anymore. And that for me is confirmed when God took me through the 7 levels of heaven in 1986, on December 22nd and 23rd, 1986. And so I have a recording of that experience for those of you who haven't heard it. I'm sure many of you had. And in fact, it was in the end of The Voice. If you saw The Voice part 1 and 2, you would see a very simple description of what it was like to go through those 7 levels. In my experience of the 7 levels is once you get to the 3rd, and Emanuel Swedenborg, the Swedish mystic who wrote Heaven and Hell, who had hundreds and hundreds of visits to heaven while he was physically alive, he attested that there was nothing beyond the 3rd. The 3rd was the absolute highest heaven. And that isn't true, but for him, at that point in his evolution, it was. But the point is, at the 3rd, you are at the maximum level of supreme bliss and joy and love that a human organism and human form can contain. And when you go to the 4th is the absolute end. It's the beginning of the end of the human form in your evolution. And 4th level beings appear spherical, and they're like mini stars. They're incredibly evolved. And so it's a huge leap when you permanently, as a soul, as a being in the afterlife, attain the 4th, you're finished with arms and legs, feet and hands. You're finished with it completely. And they serve no purpose anymore. And you'll see there are actual stories of these balls of light coming from outer space and landing on the planet, and they materialize into the form of literally Jesus Christ and other great masters throughout the ages. And then they converse with a disciple or student, and they turn back into a ball of light and they shoot off in entire space. And it's quite interesting because in the 1990s, I had access to this photography from NASA's very low light level cameras, very sensitive instrument cameras aboard the space shuttle. And there's good videography of these balls of light coming from outer space and shooting down onto the Earth. And there was a lot of them. And some of those might be actual luminous beings that are coming and going from Earth on the spiritual plane. And we're seeing them on the cameras. But we can't get close enough to them to identify exactly what they are. But there's so many of them. And one thing I noticed and I've analyzed over 100 hours of space shuttle footage, they seem to be very interested in North Africa. And of course, the Holy Land is right next to North Africa. I mean, Egypt is North Africa, and Nigeria, and you know, you're talking about, I saw this, I went through hundreds of hours of photography, and they seem to be very interested in that region where these lights would be coming out and off the earth. Now, there were lights coming to and from some of the other continents, but there was a wealth of them coming in and out of that region on the cameras. So this is who we are. So when we understand that we're evolving into this, you know, we start from the base, the roots, from the vibration and the frequencies of sensuality, sexuality, life, coziness, you know, being in your house, you got everything together, it feels really good. But then we want, you got to get out of the cocoon. You got to break the cocoon. You got to get past being cozy. And that's the point where, like, even when Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days without food, and many of the prophets did the traditional 40-day fast on bread and water or honey and locusts. You can't actually survive on nothing for 40 days. I mean, that's the point where humans actually die. If you don't feed a human for 30 or 40 days, they can actually die. But most of the great fasting techniques that were done were things like bread and water or honey and locusts. I mean, that's what, you know, Moses lived on. That's what Elijah lived on. Elijah lived on honey and locusts in these great, you know, journeys into self and into the wilderness and communicating with the higher levels of God. But that's where we're evolving. So, you know, it's funny when you go in yourself and you're 100% honest and you say, I'm done with this experience. I don't need this experience in my system anymore. And I want to go higher. I want to go higher because I've been in this state for too long. And it's hard in our culture for a person of great wealth and stature to say, I'm ready to give it all up. And it's funny, I was reading this morning, and some of you may have seen the stories of Keanu Reeves and how he just gives everything away. He gives $50 million to all the workers on a movie set. He gives his whole salary away. And he's the guy. It's funny. One day I was in LA in this big theater and I was watching this movie, and there's Keanu Reeves just standing there all by himself. And in those days, I was on the Art Bell radio show as a regular reappearing guest. And Art Bell in those days could reach, you know, 30 million people in one night. And I thought I should talk to him. He's just by himself. And he's looking at me and I'm looking at him. And I thought, no, I'm not going to talk to him because, you know, I don't know if he's going to be into this stuff. And so there he is today. He's a person. And it's funny because Keanu Reeves played the Buddha in the theatrical film, you know, the Buddha. And he played the Buddha. And I think that role really affected him because there's the Buddha, who's this prince who can have anything he wants. And Keanu Reeves could have anything he wants on the physical level, but he's not interested in it. This guy is ready to leap to something higher, but he doesn't, you can see he doesn't quite know the method and the methodologies to get there. And he doesn't know about my work, but yet at the same time, he's having his own experience of being liberated from all these symbols, you know, fast cars, fast women, all those things don't interest him at all. And when things like that don't interest you anymore, it's a sign that you're ready to go higher. But yet our civilization doesn't have the means through its religious organizations to say, here's the way, here's what you got to do. Well, you can say, yeah, you can learn meditation from a lot of people, and you can learn meditation from a lot of people. There's a lot of people that are pretty good teachers out there, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do these meditation techniques. And that's where I come in, is as a person who's studied with many different teachers from India, First Nations, America, from the Dalai Lama, which is a totally different system than India, and Christian mystics. I can tell you that your teachers out there in meditation, look for teachers that are in the authentic state, but be careful. Be careful. I've developed a system that integrates profound breath work, profound frequency and sound work, and profound insight work. And I found this to be the fastest way to accelerate. But I realize there are many people out there that are really adhering to their religion and their religious beliefs, and go ahead and do that. Look in your religious belief structure and ask yourself, the promise of God in the end of the book of Revelation is that God will wipe every tear from your eye. Is your practice conquering all suffering? Are you able to reach a state of consciousness through your religious practice that conquers your perception of all suffering? And I can say honestly that the path I'm on has done that already. Because the second I meditated last night, within 3 minutes, there's so much bliss, there's so much high vibration, high frequency energy, and there's so much pure, the ecstasy is so pure that it's actually light. There's so much of it, it absolutely conquers suffering. And that means even physical suffering. Even if I stub my toe or I threw my back out, I actually threw my back out because I've been doing extreme tobogganing with my 2 little daughters, because I take them up to the ski resort, which is closed. And I took them down this canyon in this, powder this deep, and we went flying down over these giant little cliff things. And, I got a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old in my sled, and we were having a blast, but I threw my back out and I had to climb out. To climb out the deep snow, you couldn't stick your feet straight down because you're up to here in snow. So we're climbing up and my heart is pounding, and I'm doing it for them, right? I'm doing it for them because they're at that stage where those are the kind of things that are so much fun for them. I could just say, I just want to meditate and get higher and higher and higher. But this is another thing. You will come to a point, and this actually happens, and this is a really good indicator that you're really evolving. You will come to a point where you will ask God to stop because the ecstasy gets too great. And there's a point where you cross a threshold where you're not in control of it anymore. You're not in control of it anymore. God can pull you up higher than you can withstand, and you'll be saying, stop, we can't bear this. And this is in the Gnostic Gospels during transfigurations of Christ, where they're saying, stop, we can't endure this. It's too great. And what they're saying is there's way too much love and ecstasy. We've got to ask you to tone it down. And that tells you that there's no end to this, how great the glory of God gets. And when I say God, I'm not talking about a person. I'm talking about the infinite consciousness that certain persons and personalities realized. They made it real. When you realize you make it real, that's what's in store for all of us on this path of breath, frequency, and realization. That's what's in store. And it's the greatest thing. I pray to God that my daughters take to this at some point in their life. I mean, it took me, when I was 13, I started meditating. And then slowly over the years, I increased the number of days a week that I was meditating. And by the time I was 16, 17, I was meditating every single day. Never stopped. Never stopped, because what you get out of it is so profound. There's nothing more worth your time than this. And that's where it gets difficult for people in our culture, again, to be 100% honest with yourself. Is the dream that civilization tells me, if I have this house and I have this life partner, that I'll be happy? Is it true that, do I need to have more and more wealth so I can travel more and stay in finer hotels and own houses all over the world? Maybe you can. Maybe you can have both. There are people that have been able to have everything. There are actually enlightened masters that have been incredibly wealthy. And Jesus and Mary Magdalene were incredibly wealthy. If you understand the wealth of Solomon, if you understand the wealth, they say the wealth of Solomon is beyond Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos combined. If we could find the treasure, if we could find the actual treasure. And it's very possible that, see, if you use that wealth to build a community, that inside that community, which is what Solomon was doing, was building the temple, was building the Holy of Holies and the temple, and fulfilling the work of God, then that wealth has built a community of consciousness. Absolutely. So there's no judgment about wealth. Don't think that a spiritual person has to be poor at all. I mean, my family, my little family, is just middle class, nothing special at all. Definitely not millionaire status even, but middle class. And that, don't think that because you see somebody who's a spiritual teacher and they have wealth, that means that they're not spiritual. You see Keanu Reeves giving away all of his money and giving away all his wealth. He feels a need to be reaching out into his community. And yeah, he gives a lot of money away, in some ways very recklessly, but he doesn't want it. He doesn't want that responsibility. But also what happens is, when you realize that, when your frequency gets so high that you realize you are your community, you are the community. So when someone inside your community awareness needs assistance, energetically, financially, you immediately recognize that it's actually community self-consciousness. And this comes where Jesus says to do unto others as you know, do unto others as you would do unto your own self in God. Then when you're in that state of community, you realize that you're response able, meaning you're able to respond to helping lift something else up in the community. And, you know, traditionally it's been said that when you're in this expanded state, that you should always help the poor and the needy. And sometimes the poor and the needy are there because they're lazy and they don't want to work. And just by giving them money or whatever, you're just fulfilling that desire of theirs to do nothing. And you say, well, you just don't want to do anything. And that's actually okay. Believe it or not, if you help people who don't want to do anything in their life, somehow God put them on this earth. And if you have the ability to help somebody who doesn't want to do anything, you don't know that at some point in that person's life, they may suddenly have an epiphany and contribute something to the world. You don't know. So that there's a reason that when we look at people who are on the street, and maybe they're traumatized and they don't want to do anything. I've talked to some of the street people throughout my life, and some of them just feel that, why should I work so hard and get nowhere? Well, that's true. We have a very unfair system where you can do the hardest job in the world and get nothing for it. You know, you won't even get enough money to live in an apartment. And those are, there are some people that just drop out because they don't want to participate in that. But one of the areas in expanded awareness where it would be much more intelligent than just like, I mean, at the time I met Keanu Reeves in the movie theater, I'm standing right in front of him. It's just him and I. There's nobody else around. As I was trying to raise money for Magwitch, my boss, who discovered, you know, a way to attain nuclear fusion, fusing deuterium and helium-3. And this is an MIT PhD award-winning physicist. He had a big company, but all we needed was $10 million. And my God, Keanu Reeves could have given us the money. And I was working for Magwitch at that time, but I lacked the courage to just start chatting with the guy, right? I guess there was a level of shyness in me that just didn't think that he would respond. And I had already conversed with Jane Fonda's personal staff about Magwitch and trying to raise money for him. I actually personally wrote Robert Redford, and he personally wrote me back. I had his address on his ranch in Utah, and he wrote me back, and he didn't want to help. And there were all these celebrities I had access to in those days. And all we were looking for, you know, we had Air Force studies that said that Magwitch's cubic nuclear reactor fusing deuterium and helium-3 fuel would produce 1 billion watts of continuous power with no harmful radiation. I remember getting a letter from Sally Field in person. She didn't want to help. They didn't want to do it. And then finally I was living in Aspen, Colorado. I was around the richest people in America. And I'll tell this story just because we're just in the last minutes. And I became really good friends in the 80s with a woman named Nancy Pfister. And the Pfister family owned part of Aspen. They owned one of the ski resorts up there. And Nancy was very close to me. And we had a really close friendship. This is really a deep story. Nancy introduced me. I stayed in Aspen in her house to the richest people in America. George Stranahan just sold Champion spark plugs. He had $500 million liquid cash. And she's like, don't worry, we're going to finance Magwitch. She's going to get us money. I met Bob Hefner III, who was massive, wealthy natural gas guy, sat in his mansion in Aspen. All of these people said no. Nancy was in shock. Her dad said no. Al Pfister, incredibly wealthy guy. And, you know, she introduced me to John Denver's wife, Cassandra. And I thought John Denver was going to finance Magwitch. Nobody would do it. You see, that technology would have taken the human race to a higher level. Magwitch was a Yugoslav-born, just like Nikola Tesla, American physicist with a PhD from MIT. I worked with him for 20 years. It's where I learned and expanded my knowledge in physics, you know, from my school days going into working with a real brilliant physicist. And I learned so much from him. And I actually contributed to some of the last pieces of the puzzle in attaining nuclear fusion just before Magwitch died. Anyway, at one point, this was not very long ago, within the last 5 years, Nancy Pfister was brutally murdered in her own home. And I didn't know it, but I heard the entire thing. I was in our house. We were renting a house, you know, up here, you know, just north of the Idaho border on the Canadian side. And I heard Nancy screaming and spinning around, and she called my name. She called my name, David, David. And I mean, it brings tears to my eyes to think of her because she was so close to me and she tried so hard to get the wealthy people in her community, which are the richest people in America, to do this. And nobody would do it. Even Michael Jackson and his partner wouldn't do it. And Nancy was murdered, I experienced the entire murder. And within days, I get this email from her close friends that Nancy was murdered. And I look in the paper, and you can Google it. And they arrested the wrong person. I can tell you that. The person who got arrested did not kill her. And there's a good book about the murder of Nancy Pfister that proves that there's no way that that old man doctor did it, because it was a brutal murder. But it kind of reminds me of the movie with Faye Dunaway, The Eyes of Laura Mars. This is what happens is, as we become more spiritually evolved, we are bonded through our biophotonic transmissions receptions with certain people, and we are telepathically connected to them. And when one of them experiences severe trauma, we feel it instantaneously. And this experiment was done with a mother and a baby rabbit, where they hook up the brain of the mother and the baby to an EEG, and they pinprick the baby rabbit. The mother feels it faster than the speed of light instantaneously. And once you're that bonded to a person, a deep person. I mean, I used to give Nancy Pfister massages, and, you know, we weren't lovers, we weren't, you know, together, but we were very close. And bless her for trying so hard. She saw that the whole world could change with Magwitch's technology, but her life ended in a very, very tragic way. I mean, I can't tell you what it's like to experience that instantaneous experience of somebody else's, you know, brutal death. I heard every word, but I couldn't see anything. But the sounds told me what was happening in the room, what was happening. And I was spinning around. I felt like I was really, really dizzy. She was spinning around, and the whole thing. But you can read about that. You know, it's all over the internet, and the story and the investigation that went into her, because her family was very, very well known. But the point is, when humanity isn't ready, you know, I'll bet you if I talked to Keanu Reeves at that time, he wouldn't have given Magwitch the 10 million either, because at that time he wasn't in that state yet where he was ready to do it. But Magwitch is dead now, and he died with the knowledge of how to do it. Yes, he left us blueprints. You know, I have the blueprints. I know how he did it, but it doesn't matter. Nobody will ever do it. And you could say, well, why couldn't somebody else do what he was doing? Nobody understood what Magwitch understood. There's no way to explain what he did. He entered a beam in a magnetic field chamber that looks just like one of my quills. It produces this beautiful sacred geometry vortex flower of life pattern. No other approach to nuclear fusion looks anything like it. And he attained temperatures hundreds of times hotter than the sun. So his temperatures to attain nuclear fusion had surpassed everyone in the entire world. Nobody could attain the temperatures that Magwitch attained. And so he had a secret, you know, insight into a level of understanding the universe. And what happens as your meditation gets deeper and deeper and deeper, you can actually experience what is actually happening in the universe, and you can get the answer to a revolution in understanding in whatever field of study you're in your life, whether you're a healer, a medical doctor, non-medical doctor, a scientist, an artist. You will have insights with frequencies, and certain frequencies will give you qualities and insights that you could never have gotten if you were not experiencing that frequency. So with that, you know, we're done for this week. And thank you all for participating and just being here. And next week, we're going to send you the link to Quantum Communication on Gaia TV Part 1 and Part 2. And then we'll resume here with me the week after that. So have a great week, everybody. Thank you for being here. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Dana.
you, Shiraz.
Hey, Daddy!
Yeah, where is it?
It's over here. Follow me.